James Harrison stood before his easel, brush hovering over canvas, when the email changed everything. The notification pinged softly on his phone, barely audible over the rain pattering against his studio apartment's windows. Another message from the Universal Housing Initiative, probably apologizing for the delay in finding him a roommate. He needed one desperately. Art sales weren't exactly booming in Seattle's oversaturated market. But this email was different. Congratulations on your match with the Intergalactic Cultural Exchange Program, it began. James read it 3 times, certain it was spam. Yet the official seals and detailed documentation seemed legitimate. His new roommate would arrive in 2 days. From another planet. James spent those 48 hours in a state of controlled panic. He cleaned his apartment obsessively, hiding his more controversial paintings and wondering what aliens considered controversial anyway. He researched xenocultural etiquette online, finding mostly conspiracy theories and fan fiction. The Housing Initiative's preparation packet was frustratingly vague, full of bureaucratic language about maintaining an open mind and embracing new perspectives. When the knock finally came, James wasn't ready. He opened the door to find a tall, ethereal figure whose appearance defied earthly description. Her skin seemed to shift like the surface of a soap bubble, iridescent patterns flowing beneath a translucent surface. Where human eyes would be, she had crystalline structures that refracted light in impossible ways. Her form was humanoid, yet moved with a fluid grace that made James's artist fingers itch for a brush. "Greetings, James Harrison," she said, her voice resonating like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I am Visra of the Luminary. May I enter your dwelling?" James stepped aside, words failing him. Visra glided past, carrying nothing but a small crystalline cube that pulsed with inner light. She surveyed his apartment with those prismatic eyes, pausing at his easel where his unfinished painting stood. "You create visual representations of reality and imagination," she observed. "This is why you were selected." "Selected?" James found his voice. "I thought this was random matching." Visra turned to face him, her skin rippling with patterns that reminded him of Aurora Borealis. "The Luminary believe in purposeful connections. You perceive the world through art. I study how beings perceive reality." The matching was optimal. James ran a hand through his disheveled dark hair, trying to process this information. "So, you're like a scientist?" "In your terms, yes. Though the distinction between art and science does not exist among my people. All observation is art. All art is observation." She moved closer to his painting, her presence making the hair on his arms stand up. Not from fear, but from something else he couldn't name. "Your work captures emotions." "Fascinating. You can tell that from an unfinished painting?" The Luminary perceive emotional residue in creative works. "Your brush strokes carry loneliness, frustration, hope." She turned those crystalline eyes on him. "Are these your emotions, James Harrison?" The direct question made him uncomfortable, but something about Visra's genuine curiosity disarmed him. "Yeah, I guess they are. And you can just call me James." "James," she repeated, the name sounding like music in her otherworldly voice. "Will you teach me about human emotions through your art?" He gestured to his cramped studio apartment, with canvases stacked against walls and paint supplies cluttering every surface. "I'm not exactly a successful artist. Maybe you should study someone more accomplished." Visra's skin rippled with what he would later learn was amusement. Success is a human construct. Your art speaks truth. This is what interests me. She paused, her crystalline eyes refracting rainbow patterns on the wall. Does my presence disturb you? James considered the question. Having an alien roommate who could literally see his emotions in his artwork should have terrified him. Instead, he felt oddly calm. Maybe it was the way she approached everything with such genuine fascination, or maybe he was still in shock. Either way, he answered honestly. No, you don't disturb me. This is just a lot to process. I've never been anyone's guide to humanity before. Then we shall learn together, Visra said. You will teach me about human emotions, and I will help you see your world through new eyes. Is this arrangement acceptable? James looked at his unfinished painting, then back at his alien roommate whose very presence challenged everything he thought he knew about art and reality. A smile tugged at his lips. Yeah, I think it is. As Visra settled into the spare room that evening, James added new colors to his palette, iridescent and shifting ones that he'd never thought to use before. His brush moved with renewed purpose, inspired by the impossible being who had walked into his life and offered to help him see the world anew. Little did he know that this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he understood about art, emotion, and the true meaning of human connection. 2 weeks into their cohabitation, James was beginning to understand why the Housing Initiative's preparation packet had emphasized maintaining an open mind. Living with Visra challenged every assumption he had about personal space, privacy, and social norms. She didn't sleep, at least not in any way humans would recognize. Instead, she spent nights in a crystalline meditation state, her form emanating soft pulses of light that seeped under his bedroom door. She didn't eat either, sustaining herself through some form of energy absorption that made the lights flicker whenever she fed. But it was her constant observation that really tested his adaptability. As an artist, James was used to being the observer, not the observed. Visra watched him with unwavering fascination as he painted, cooked, or performed the most mundane tasks. Her crystalline eyes tracked his movements, and her skin would ripple with patterns that seemed to reflect his own emotional state. Your brushstrokes are different today, she noted one morning as he worked on a new piece. They carry less weight, more light. Has something changed? James paused, studying his canvas. He hadn't noticed, but she was right. His usual heavy, brooding style had given way to something more ethereal, reminiscent of the way light played across Visra's skin. I guess you're rubbing off on me, he admitted. Her skin flickered with what he now recognized as pleasure. Cultural exchange is occurring as intended. You are learning to see differently. And what are you learning about humans? He asked, curious about her research. Visra moved closer, her presence making the air tingle with static electricity. Humans are wonderfully contradictory. You seek connection yet maintain barriers. You create art to express emotions, then hide those same emotions in daily interaction. Fascinating. We are not always hiding, James defended. We just have different levels of comfort with emotional expression. Yes, your species' obsession with privacy intrigues me. Among the luminary, all is shared thoughts, emotions, space. The concept of personal space does not exist. That explained a lot about her behavior. James had lost count of the times he'd turned around to find her inches away, studying his reactions. He'd gotten better at not jumping in surprise, but it still unsettled him sometimes. The incident happened later that day. James had just finished a long painting session and headed to his room to change for a gallery showing. He'd explained to Vesra that he needed to network with other artists, though the concept of competitive career advancement seemed to confuse her. He was halfway through changing his paint-stained shirt when his bedroom door opened. Vesra stood in the doorway, her crystalline eyes refracting the late afternoon sunlight. "James, I wish to understand why humans gather to view art in designated spaces when," she stopped, noticing his state of undress. But instead of leaving, she moved closer, her skin rippling with intense patterns of curiosity. "Vesra." James grabbed his shirt, holding it against his chest. "We talked about knocking. Your epidermis shows signs of emotional response," she observed, seemingly oblivious to his discomfort. "Your pigmentation is changing, blood vessels dilating. Is this embarrassment? Shame? Why do humans attach such significance to the visibility of their physical form?" James took a deep breath, reminding himself that she wasn't being intentionally invasive. "Yes, it's embarrassment. Humans generally don't show their bodies to others unless there's a certain level of intimacy." "Intimacy," she repeated, her skin swirling with new patterns. "This concept occurs frequently in your art, yet its parameters remain unclear. Physical proximity, emotional connection, sexual attraction." James felt his face grow even warmer. "It can be all of those things. Look, can we have this conversation when I'm fully dressed?" Vesra's form dimmed slightly, which he'd learned indicated disappointment or contrition. "I have caused discomfort. This was not my intent." She moved toward the door but paused. "James, may I ask one more question?" He sighed. "Just one. When you create art of the human form, you observe nude models without this embarrassment. How does this align with your privacy customs?" It was a fair question, and one that made James really think about the contradictions in human behavior. "That's different. It's a professional setting, and there's consent and clear boundaries. It's not the same as walking in on someone changing." "Boundaries," she mused. "Always boundaries with humans. Yet your art seeks to transcend them. Another fascinating contradiction." After she left, James stood for a long moment, still clutching his shirt. He'd been so focused on not making Vesra uncomfortable that he hadn't considered how confusing human customs must seem to her. Every interaction was a potential cultural minefield, yet somehow, her genuine curiosity made even the most awkward moments feel like opportunities for understanding. He finished changing and found her in the living room, her form unusually still. "Hey," he said softly. "About what just happened?" "I have reviewed our cohabitation agreement," she interrupted. "It specifies respect for privacy customs. I failed to uphold this agreement. Will this breach affect our continued cooperation?" James couldn't help but smile at her formal concern. "No, it won't. Cultural misunderstandings are bound to happen. What matters is that we learn from them." Her form brightened visibly. "Then you will still accompany me to your gallery showing?" "I wish to observe human artistic interaction rituals." "Yes, but maybe we should establish some clear guidelines first. About personal space, privacy, and..." He gestured vaguely, clothing-related situations. "Agreed. Though I must note, your emotional patterns during our interaction were more complex than simple embarrassment." There were traces of. She paused, her crystalline eyes refracting in a way that seemed almost teasing. Never mind. We should proceed to your gallery showing. As they left the apartment, James couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen more in his emotional response than he was ready to acknowledge. The strange thing was, he wasn't sure that bothered him anymore. The gallery showing changed everything. James watched as Vesra moved through the crowded space, her ethereal form drawing curious glances from other attendees. She had adapted her appearance to appear more human, her skin now a subtle opalescent rather than its usual dramatic light show, her crystalline eyes dimmed to a more conventional blue. Yet she still moved with that otherworldly grace that made her impossible to ignore. Your work is different, remarked Regina Walsh, one of Seattle's most influential gallery owners. She stood before James's newest pieces, her head tilted in consideration. There's something luminous about these. Almost alien. James nearly choked on his wine. I've been experimenting with new techniques, he managed. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. These pieces speak to something profound about the human experience. Regina tapped her chin thoughtfully. The interplay of light and emotion. I'd like to feature them in next month's showcase. As Regina walked away, Vesra materialized at James's side. She perceives truth without understanding its source, she observed. Humans often come closest to understanding when they are not trying to understand. Speaking of understanding, James said quietly, we should talk about what happened earlier. The whole privacy incident. Vesra's skin rippled with what might have been nervousness, a very unluminary-like emotion. Perhaps somewhere less populated. They found a quiet corner of the gallery, away from the crowds. James's newest paintings surrounded them, each one unconsciously influenced by Vesra's presence in his life. Looking at them now, he could see how his art had changed, become more ethereal, more luminous, more alive. I must tell you something, Vesra began, her voice carrying an unfamiliar tension. My presence in your dwelling was not merely for cultural exchange. James felt his stomach tighten. What do you mean? The luminari were not always as we are now. Once, we experienced emotions as humans do, raw, powerful, unpredictable. Our ancestors deemed these emotions inefficient, dangerous. Through generations of genetic modification, we evolved beyond them. Her form dimmed slightly. Or so we believed. You are saying your people don't feel emotions? We experience something different. Analytical appreciation. Logical recognition of patterns. But not the depth of feeling I observe in humans. She gestured to his paintings. Not this. James studied her, noting how her usual patterns of light seemed more chaotic than normal. So why are you really here? Our society is experiencing complications. Young luminari are exhibiting unprecedented emotional responses. Some believe we made a mistake in eliminating our emotional capacity. Others fear these emerging emotions will destroy our carefully ordered society. She turned her crystalline eyes to him. I was sent to study human emotions, to understand how your species manages them without self-destruction. And the Housing Initiative. A collaboration between those who believe we must understand emotions again and those who wish to prevent their return. My observations are meant to help determine our species' future path. She paused, her form flickering uncertainly. But something unexpected has occurred. James stepped closer, drawn by the vulnerability in her voice. What? I am experiencing emotions myself. Your art, your presence, they awaken something that should be impossible. Her skin swirled with complex patterns he'd never seen before. When I observed you changing, my response was not merely scientific curiosity. I felt something. The revelation hung between them, heavy with implications. James reached out instinctively, then hesitated, his hand hovering near her luminescent form. May I? She nodded, and he gently touched her arm. Her skin felt like silk made of light, warm and vibrating with energy. Where his fingers made contact, patterns of color spread like ripples in a pond. Your touch creates patterns I cannot analyze, she whispered. It defies all luminary understanding of physical interaction. Maybe some things aren't meant to be analyzed, James suggested. Maybe they're just meant to be felt. The council would consider such thinking dangerous. Her form brightened where his hand still rested on her arm. They monitor my research closely. If they detect emotional contamination. Is that what this is? James asked softly. Contamination? Before she could answer, her form suddenly stiffened. A high-pitched tone emanated from the crystalline cube she always carried, her communication device with her homeworld. The patterns across her skin shifted to sharp, angular forms that James had never seen before. The council demands an immediate progress report, she said, her voice returning to its former formal tone. I must comply. She moved away from his touch, her form already beginning to shift back to its more dramatic alien appearance as the gallery's other patrons started to leave. James watched her go, his artist's eye noting how her movements had changed, less fluid, more controlled, as if she were fighting against something within herself. He turned to his paintings, seeing them with new eyes. Each canvas captured not just his own emotions, but the gradual awakening of visceras. The colors and patterns he'd unconsciously incorporated weren't just artistic choices, they were a documentary of a being rediscovering what it meant to feel. As he stood there, surrounded by the evidence of their growing connection, James realized they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He had been chosen to help study human emotions, but instead, he might have inadvertently triggered a revolution in an alien society. The question was, what would the Luminary Council do when they realized their observer had become compromised by the very emotions she was meant to study? In the days following the gallery showing, James's apartment became a battlefield of unspoken tensions. Visra spent hours in silent communion with her crystalline cube, receiving what seemed to be increasingly urgent communications from her homeworld. Her form would fluctuate wildly during these sessions, rippling with patterns that looked almost like static interference. James threw himself into his painting, trying to capture the complexity of their situation on canvas. His work had taken on a fevered quality, intense pieces filled with swirling lights and shadowy figures caught between worlds. Regina had already sold 3 of them, sight unseen, based on photographs alone. It was during one of his painting sessions that Visra finally broke their uneasy silence. The council is sending an observer, she announced, her voice carrying an unfamiliar tremor. They wish to evaluate my research directly. James set down his brush, paint dripping unnoticed onto the drop cloth. When? 3 days. Her form flickered like a candle in wind. James, there is something you must understand. The observer will not simply review my findings. They will scan my consciousness, access my memories, my... She paused, searching for the word feelings. The implications hit him hard. Everything. Including. Yes. Every interaction, every emotion, every moment of confusion and clarity between us. She moved closer, her presence making the air hum with energy. They will know that I have failed in my mission to remain objective. That I have become compromised. James stood, closing the distance between them. Is that what you think has happened? You've been compromised? Her crystalline eyes refracted light in complex patterns. The luminary have no word for what has happened. Our language lacks the vocabulary for these sensations. She lifted a luminescent hand to his face, not quite touching. When I am near you, my form resonates at frequencies that should not be possible. My thoughts scatter like light through a prism. I experience chaos. Some might call that falling in love, James said softly. Her hand trembled near his cheek. Love. Another concept we abandoned generations ago. Deemed too volatile, too unpredictable. Finally, she made contact, her fingers sending shivers of electric warmth across his skin. Yet here I am, discovering its meaning through touch and color and the way your art makes my very essence vibrate. James brought his hand up to cover hers, paint-stained fingers intertwining with living light. What will they do when they discover this? Best case scenario? They will recall me immediately, subject me to emotional purification. Her form dimmed at the thought. Worst case. They will determine that human contact is too dangerous, that the risk of emotional contamination is too high. All exchange programs will be terminated. And you? What do you want? The patterns across her skin shifted into something entirely new, a kaleidoscope of colors that seemed to pulse in time with James's heartbeat. What I want is not relevant. I have a duty to my people, to their evolution. But what if this is evolution? James gestured to his paintings, to the space between them crackling with energy. What if feeling isn't a step backward, but forward? Your people chose to eliminate emotions because they feared them, but look at what they're missing. He grabbed a blank canvas, quickly laying down broad strokes of color that mimicked the patterns flowing across Visra's skin. She watched, transfixed, as he painted with an urgency he'd never felt before. Humans feel deeply, yes, and sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it's messy and chaotic and terrifying. But it's also beautiful. The painting took shape, a swirling vortex of light and shadow, joy and pain, fear and love all intertwined. This is what it means to be alive. To feel everything, to embrace the chaos, to let it change you. Visra moved to stand beside him, her form unconsciously matching the patterns he was painting. The council believes such intensity of feeling leads to destruction. Or creation, James countered, adding final touches to the piece. Look at what feeling has helped humans create: art, music, literature. Look at what it's helped me create since meeting you. She studied the painting, her crystalline eyes refracting its colors. Your art has indeed evolved since my arrival. The emotional resonance is stronger, more complex. She turned to face him. But is it worth the risk? Isn't that what your research was supposed to determine? How humans manage their emotions? He set down his brush. We manage them by sharing them, by expressing them through art and words and touch. By connecting with others who help us understand them. Visra's form brightened suddenly, an idea taking shape. Perhaps that is the answer. Not suppression or elimination, but understanding through connection. She reached for her crystalline cube. I must communicate with certain members of the council before the observer arrives. There are some who suspect, as I do, that our species' salvation lies not in emotional purity, but in relearning how to feel. What can I do? She turned those impossible eyes to him. Continue creating. Your art may be the evidence we need, proof that emotions can lead to evolution rather than destruction. Her form pulsed with newfound purpose. And James. Yes? If we fail, if they try to take me back. She moved closer, her light mingling with his shadow. Know that you have taught me something my species forgot centuries ago. Sometimes the most logical choice is to follow one's heart. Before James could respond, she pressed her luminescent form against him. The sensation was like being immersed in warm light, every cell in his body singing with electric joy. In that moment, he understood that no matter what the observer might bring, they had already crossed a point of no return. The question was, would their love spark a revolution, or would it be erased in the name of emotional purity? The observer arrived at dawn, materializing in James's living room in a flash of blinding light. Unlike Visra's luminescent beauty, the observer's form was stark and geometric, all sharp angels and cold, white light. Its presence seemed to drain the color from the room, turning James's vibrant paintings into muted shadows of themselves. Researcher Visra, the observer's voice resonated like crystalline chimes, but without the warmth that characterized Visra's speech. You will submit to immediate evaluation. Visra stood tall, her form blazing with unprecedented brightness. Honorable observer, before you begin, I request the right to present my findings formally. Your findings are irrelevant. We detect significant emotional contamination in your patterns. You require immediate purification and... Look around you, Visra interrupted, gesturing to the artwork that filled the apartment. These are my findings. The observer's form shifted, geometric patterns rearranging themselves as it took in the paintings. These are human artifacts. They hold no scientific value. James stepped forward, ignoring how the observer's presence made his skin crawl. Each of these pieces documents Visra's evolution. They're a record of what your people lost and what they could regain. The observer turned its attention to James, its blank, white face revealing nothing. Human James Harrison. You have interfered with our research protocols. Your influence has corrupted. No, Visra's voice rang out, her form pulsing with colors so intense they made James's eyes water. He hasn't corrupted me. He's awakened me. Observer, you must understand our ancestors made a mistake. In eliminating emotion, they didn't elevate our species. They crippled it. She moved to the largest of James's recent paintings, a massive canvas that dominated the wall. Look at this piece. Really look at it. Don't just analyze, feel it. The observer remained silent, its geometric form rigid with disapproval. You can't, can you? Visra pressed. You see the patterns, the colors, the technical execution, but you can't feel its meaning. That's what we've lost. The ability to experience beauty, to connect, to grow through feeling. Emotion leads to chaos, the observer stated flatly. No, James interjected, moving to stand beside Visra. Emotion leads to this. He gestured to his work. To creation. To evolution. Your people chose stability over growth, but look what it's cost you. The observer's form flickered slightly. The council has detected increasing emotional instability in our youth. Your research was meant to help us prevent this regression. It's not regression, Visra said softly. It's progression. The young ones aren't becoming unstable, they're becoming whole. They're reaching for something our species has denied them for generations. She reached for James's hand, their energies intermingling in a display of light that filled the room. This is what they're reaching for. Connection. Real, deep, emotional connection. The observer's form crackled with what might have been agitation. This display is unprecedented. You have violated every protocol. Because the protocols are wrong. Visra's form flared. I was sent to study how humans manage their emotions. This is how, through art, through love, through embracing the very chaos we feared. Humans don't suppress their feelings, they transform them into something beautiful. As if to emphasize her point, the morning sun crested the horizon, sending rays of light through the apartment's windows. They caught the observer's geometric form, refracting through it and casting rainbow patterns across James's paintings. For a moment, even the observer seemed transfixed by the interplay of natural light and artistic emotion. The council must be informed, the observer said finally, its tone less certain. They already have been, Visra replied. While waiting for your arrival, I transmitted my complete findings to every member of the council. Not just my research notes, my experiences, my emotions, my transformation. They'll feel what I've felt, see what I've seen. The observer's form stuttered, patterns breaking and reforming. This is unprecedented. The protocol for such situations no longer applies, Visra finished. We're evolving, observer. Not backward into chaos, but forward into a new kind of order. One that embraces feeling instead of fearing it. She turned to James, her form shimmering with emotions that needed no translation. I choose this. I choose feeling. I choose love. The observer's geometric patterns began to shift, becoming less rigid, more fluid. The council is divided. There is much debate about your transmission. Some are calling for immediate recall of all researchers. Others. It paused, its white light taking on the faintest hint of color. Others are experiencing emotional responses to your data. Then let them feel, James said. Let them see what they've been missing. Art, love, emotion, they're not weaknesses. They're the keys to your evolution. The observer was silent for a long moment, its form slowly transforming, angels softening into curves. When it spoke again, its voice carried a new quality, something almost like wonder. Your research will continue, researcher Visra. But its parameters have changed. You will now document this evolution. Both yours and mine. What do you mean? Visra asked, though her brightening form suggested she already knew. I too am experiencing something. These paintings. This light. These feelings. The observer's once stark form now rippled with faint colors. Perhaps there is truth in what you say. Perhaps it is time for our species to remember what we forgot. As the sun rose higher, its light filled the apartment, reflecting off paintings and illuminating three forms, one human, one luminescent with love, and one slowly awakening to the possibility of feeling. James squeezed Visra's hand, watching as their combined energy created patterns that danced across his canvas like living art. They had done more than fall in love. They had sparked a revolution, not one of violence or destruction, but of beauty and feeling. As the observer began its own journey of emotional awakening, James realized that sometimes the most powerful changes don't come through force, but through art, through love, through the simple courage to feel everything life has to offer. Visra turned to him, her form radiating joy. Ready to help teach an entire species how to feel again? James smiled, already reaching for his brushes. One painting at a time. And in the growing light of dawn, two beings from different worlds began their greatest masterpiece, teaching a civilization to embrace the beautiful chaos of emotion, one heart at a time.